when you find yourself at the same point over and over and saying, oh, this is like Groundhog Day. Why is it that I just keep landing in the same spot over and over? Well, you have to look at it and say, what are the things leading up to that? What are the decisions I'm making? What are the habits I'm doing? Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And pretty soon you can start to recognize your own patterns. When you can recognize your own patterns, that's when you can create change.
No fake shit against me shall prosper. Yes, I came, I conquered.
Today's topics is something that, just like the discipline one, I was kind of avoiding this because I have a ton of bad habits. But I think today we're going to talk more about maybe creating some better ones and sticking with them. The first thing I'd like to know is, where do we learn our habits? Are you born with it, or is it something that your environment kind of brings onto you?
I think there's a lot of different ways that we could potentially learn a pattern. Let's call it a pattern. I think something becomes habitual when there's a certain pattern there. And I mentioned before a book that I really enjoyed reading, that I could relate a lot to. It's called The Power of Habit. I actually have it right here. This is a great book. This is an incredible book. But one of the things they talk about in this book is really looking at habits from more of a scientific standpoint. And there's some interesting things about habits. And of course, we say a habit is just our routine. It's what we do on a daily basis. But there's a reason why we do it. Why is it that it's so hard to break bad habits? And I think that's the important thing when we're talking about maybe even establishing good habits, is first we have to understand bad habits. Why do we do the things that we do? And the first thing is, you have to look at it and you have to almost be a little more analytical. And you have to look at what you're doing and ask yourself that question, why? So take someone maybe who is a stress eater. There's a lot of people that eat out of stress, right? You can relate to that. And it's not that different than people that drink out of stress or maybe smoke cigarettes out of stress. At the end of the day, stress it's when you're feeling uncomfortable. And a lot of times we find ourselves falling into bad habits when we're uncomfortable. We're bored. It's uncomfortable to be bored. You pace around the house and you don't know what to do with yourself. A lot of times you gravitate towards the refrigerator or the pantry.
Right. Or
if you're upset or if you're depressed, right? It's usually when you're uncomfortable. So when someone's eating out of stress, what are they really looking for? At the end of the day, they're looking to change their emotional state. They don't want to feel stressed anymore.
You break up, you have a pint of ice cream, it changes your emotional state.
Changes your emotional state. So you have to learn, what are those cues? What are the things that are triggering it? So let's say it's stress. Something comes up, whatever it is. So there's a cue, there's the habit, which is going and then eating. And then there's the reward for doing it, which is the emotional state change, right? Food is like a drug. When you eat, it changes your state just like alcohol or cigarettes or drugs or anything else. And so that's why people do it. It makes you feel good. So that is that pattern. It's the cue, it's the habit, and it's the reward. And if the reward wasn't there, you wouldn't do it.
And I saw something about exactly what you're saying. Sorry for interrupting, but this guy put it in the perfect way. The 3 R's of habit: reminder, routine, reward. Basically just what you said right there.
How do you get rid of a bad habit? Well, you'll hear a lot of people say you replace it with a good habit. Why is that? Well, because you still have to satisfy whatever that need is. So in the case of stress eating, if you're feeling stressed, you need to find some sort of good habit that is a stress relief.
Trigger that, yep.
Right? But it has to feel good. There's got to be the reward in order for that to become a habit. Otherwise, you're not going to do it. So you have to learn to figure out what it is or why it is that you're doing something. And so that's one, unwinding bad habits. Now, the same thing applies to good habits. So you want to create a good habit for yourself. You create a cue for yourself, like we've talked about before, having that kind of that routine. That's why for me, working out, I like to work out at the exact same time every day, and I like to do it the same way. I create those cues for myself. And then the habit is working out, and then that reward for me. The reward for me is that feeling that I get after. It's that sense of accomplishment.
Right.
It feels good. It feels like I've got control of my life. I just went out and did something that I know is good for myself, and I feel like I have this sense of control.
And you think that that kind of reward is the same as somebody eating a pint of ice cream?
I think that once you get into it, yeah, it actually, for me, it is. It's more satisfying. For me, I don't get that kind of satisfaction out of eating an ice cream. I've kind of conditioned myself where it's almost the opposite. If I eat that pint of ice cream, I feel like I have a lack of control in my life, and it actually makes me feel bad.
Right. You think you're born with bad habits, or you think it's a product of your environment, really? Because, I mean, look, you were talking about, you may pick up some bad habits. Your parents smoke or your parents drink. They say something like alcoholism is, a hereditary thing.
I really feel like habits they're almost like a tool. They're coping mechanisms, right? So all the things that are going on in our life, we try to learn how to deal with these things. And so, yeah, I think a lot of them are learned. If you see your parents coping with stress a certain way, whether, like we talked about, it's alcohol or cigarettes or food or whatever it is, then yeah, there's probably a good chance that you're going to learn from them. You're going to, take the lead from them. So yeah, I think some of them are learned. Maybe some of them we fall into. But again, it's that reward. It's whatever we get out of it that keeps us stuck in that pattern. And no matter how hard we try to fight it, we find ourselves in that same pattern, doing it over and over again. And then when you keep doing something that you don't want to do, of course, you feel frustrated with yourself. You feel angry. That's where people really start to feel like their life is out of control and they kind of spiral downward. And so that's the satisfaction that I get going into the gym and doing those small things, right? And kind of linking all those small things together. We talk about Legos, one Lego piece plus another Lego piece, and pretty soon you link those all together and now you can form one bigger habit, but you still have to do it piece by piece. But each of those little pieces, every time you do something, you have to create that reward for yourself to reinforce it. And that's what's going to build that momentum like we talked about in the past. And that's what's going to make it stick over time. It's not going to be willpower.
Right. The one thing you need for any of this to happen is the right mindset. Not a lot of people are going to have...
I don't know if it's mindset. I think, that's part of it. I think it's a strategy.
Right.
Right? We've talked about before, how different is it, us training ourselves to have good habits than maybe training a dog. If you want to teach a puppy how to sit, right? You have certain cues for him. You're trying to teach him this habit.
Routine, reward.
When he does it, you reward him, right? And it becomes automatic. And that's the power of habits, is things starting to become automatic. You and I talked about it the other day. They say something like we can only consciously focus on about 7 things at any one time. That means that every single thing that you're doing that you're conscious of counts. So we talked about if you're driving, all right, so your foot on the accelerator or the brake, that's one thing. Your hand on the steering wheel, looking down the road is another thing. If you're glancing at your phone, that's another thing. And that's where people end up getting into car accidents, is they get overloaded, right? They can only focus on so many things at once. And so when they crash into the person, they legitimately didn't see him. It's because their brain was just overloaded.
Are they not smart enough to have, more than 7 sensors messing them up?
No, I think, look, there's probably a difference. They say that 7 plus or minus 2. So some people can handle less.
Right.
Some people can handle just a little bit more. But at the end of the day, our conscious mind can only handle so many things at once. Now, take something new. Like, let's say you go into the gym for the very first time. The very first time in the gym, think about all the things that are decisions that you have to make. You go in there and it's, well, what am I going to do today? What body part am I going to work out? What exercise am I going to do? How many sets am I going to do? How many reps am I going to do? And what is that person over there doing? And
even with supplements, I mean, you have the same thing with, what do I take before? What do I take during? What do I take after?
So you're talking about all these conscious decisions that you're now having to make, and it becomes very overwhelming, right? Now you're overloading your brain with all these decisions. So you go into the gym, you're like, it just seems so hard, so big, so overwhelming. You talked about procrastination. What was one of my reasons why people procrastinate? They feel overwhelmed. It feels like too big. The problem is you have to start, right? You have to start, and through time, through repetition, you get better at something. You do something long enough, pretty soon you don't have to think about it anymore. It starts to become automatic. And that's really the power. That's what we're talking about, is something becoming habitual, becoming automatic or on autopilot. So for me, I said it's easier for me to go out in the gym every day than it is for you, because I don't think about it anymore.
Right.
It's routine for me. It's automatic. And that's what we need, is to do something long enough, over and over and over again, to where it just becomes habitual. So it's not a big stress for me. I don't I don't, put all the thought and energy into it that you do. I don't have to talk myself into it. I just go out there and I do it.
Back to, maybe there is an answer for this. Maybe there isn't. It's probably by person. I probably know the answer to it. But how many times do I need to do something before it becomes a habit? You get what I'm saying? Like, what's that scientific formula for it?
It depends. I mean, it depends on what we're talking about, how strong the reward is. If someone shoots up heroin for the first time, how long does it take for them to form that bad habit? For them, the reward of doing it, that feeling, that sense of escape or whatever it is that they're getting out of it, it's very, very powerful, right? So it's very easy for them to form that habit very quickly. So we're talking about the same thing. So it depends on how powerful your reward is for that habit. And so that's the thing is I'm always talking about having to reward yourself, right? If you want to make this a habit, if you want to make this part of your routine, you got to find those little ways to pat yourself on the back, because that's what's going to go ahead and support that and turn that into a habit.
Well, even more simple than that. How do I start a new habit? It kind of seems like you have a morning reminder. You just got that scooter. You're saying, hey, I want to have the scooter now every morning. I want to go to the beach first and then drive over to work. Is that kind of like you're setting a routine for yourself? Is that some kind of habit that you can?
Yeah, no, that's where I talk about you got to get down to specifics. So if you want to make something habitual, that means you really have to make it very routine, right? So that means saying, okay, if I want to go to the beach, I can't just tell myself, well, I want to go to the beach once a week. That's not specific enough. That's never going to make it routine, make it automatic. It's got to be one of those things where I wake up on Tuesday, I say Tuesday's the day that I'm going to the beach, right? It's just an automatic thing. It's part of my daily
your
routine.
Reminder, right?
Well, it's just part of my routine. It's part of that automatic process that happens. Okay, well, I'm going to wake up a certain time that day, and I'm going to, get my shit together for that day. I'm going to get my workout bands and whatever, and I'm going to hop on my scooter and I'm going to cruise over there. So it's got to be, that's why I always recommend when you work out, setting a very specific time that you do it every day when you can, because that's when people fall out of the routine. Whatever their routines are, it's when something usually happens. Something changes. We talked about that last week, whether it's a change in your job or if there's something that disrupts your schedule.
Any reason to get out of it almost.
Well, it's not even a reason to get out of it. It just disrupts your pattern, right? That autopilot, right? It's a script. I always think of our brain almost like a computer program, because that's the way it works. It just runs a program without us really thinking about it. Like, we are not just a byproduct of our habits, the things that we do, we're a byproduct of the decisions that we make. That's the importance of making good decisions. Here's the problem. We make countless decisions every single day. Many of them are conscious decisions, things that we actually think about, but so many of them are unconscious decisions, things that we don't even think about. And those things are our habits. And that's why it's important to be aware of our habits, our patterns, the decisions that we make unconsciously, become aware of them. The ones that aren't productive, reshape those or replace those with better ones. We talked about when I got in that car accident years ago, that a pheasant, a bird, flew at my windshield, and my knee-jerk reaction was swerve. Why? I'll be honest with you, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but I loved my car. I had this, this beautiful little sports car. And
it was the only thing you had.
It was the only thing I had, so it's like I didn't want anything to ding it, scratch it,
That's
whatever.
$7 in a Porsche,
right? Yeah, $7 in a Porsche, which doesn't even make sense, but that's exactly what it was. And so, having this bird fly right at my windshield, all I'm thinking is, I don't want this bird to hit my car. So I had already made that decision in my head in advance that if something came at my car or got in front of my car, I was going to swerve.
That was your habit. It's like,
Well, it was a predetermined decision, right? And so in that split second, when I didn't have time to make, to go ahead and think this through, when I have to make a quick decision, that was a decision I made. And so now my decision making is different. If something runs out in front of my car, I'm going to brake, right? And I'm going to hold on.
Except if it's a human child.
I said that was my one exception. If it's a small child, then I'm definitely going to swerve. I'm going to try to save that kid. But other than that,
when he turns 12, he's done.
Yeah, he's done. Then it's his fault. He shouldn't run out in the road. He knows better. But that's the thing. You have to program yourself that in certain circumstances, that when you don't have time to think about it, or you're not going to think about it, or it's going to be very automatic, you kind of have to program yourself with the type of decisions that you're going to make.
7 steps to starting a good habit is number one, it says start small. You agree with that?
Well, I do. I mean, we talk about goal setting. It's the same thing I just talked about with Legos, right? It's very difficult if you say, well, I'm going to establish this new habit of going to the gym every day, training really hard, to reach this weight loss goal. It's really difficult to just make that whole thing stick. Right? Because we talk about the cues, doing, the habit, the pattern, and then the reward. It's difficult to break into that cycle, but it's really easy to do it on a small level. If I said, okay, the first thing that I want you to do is just get in the habit of going to the gym every day. And by you walking in the front door, that's a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pride, you sticking to your commitment to yourself, and that feels good. Honoring your commitment to yourself. Pat yourself on the back and say, hey, instead of me beating myself up emotionally because I'm not, doing what I need to do, let me break this into smaller things. Every time I do one of these small things, cross it off my list, it's going to feel good, and I'm going to reward myself. And all those things over time start to build and they stack on top of each other. It's like that, analogy we used of, bricklaying. You build a wall brick by brick, layer by layer.
Number 2, get hooked on your habit. It's almost like love it. You know what I mean? Take it on full go. What do you think about that?
I think that you have to come to appreciate things. Like for me, we talked about discipline before. I had no discipline as a kid. I had to learn to appreciate discipline. And where I started to appreciate it is when I started to see the results of it, right? The result of sticking to something. And that started to feel good. And it goes back to that reward. It's the exact same thing.
Number 3, have clear intentions for your habit. What do you think about that?
Have clear intentions. Yeah, well, it's just like anything else. I talk about you can't be vague about things. Whatever you do, you just have to be very specific and very focused. Right. So yeah, you do have to have clear intentions. You can't just go in and say, hey, I would like to have this new habit of, working out every day. Way too vague.
Number 4, we've talked about this. Celebrate the small wins. That's, I think, probably number 1. To you seem like the reward part of it is a big part to you because
it's just what's going to support it, what's going to drive it, because that's just the way we work. There's kind of 2 things that motivate us. One, it's this desire to move away from things that are unpleasant or painful, and a desire to move towards things that create pleasure for us.
Right.
I mean, we're kind of primal in that respect.
Right. Number 5, design your environment. And this is what we're talking about. Is it learned? Is it, I guess the advice from here is make it so that your environment pushes you towards your good habits. Stay away from the smokers. Stay away from your buddies who are drinking alcohol. I guess that's kind of
you definitely have to be aware of that. I mean, look, you have to surround yourself with people that are going to support you in your goals.
Number 6, surround yourself with people that support your goals. Yeah. You said it right there, and that's I think a huge part of it too. Especially if you're not one of the guys like you, I don't think you really need a huge support system to create good habits. But someone like me, I do need the positive influence of others to kind of just push me towards my good habits.
Well, I'd say this: you don't always have to surround yourself with people that are going to support it. Just don't hang around a bunch of people that aren't going to support it.
Right. And number 7, pre-commit to your habit.
First of all, you do have to commit to it, but it's a commitment to yourself, and that also goes back to the reward. If you commit to something, you're making a commitment to yourself. So think about, on one hand, how good it feels when you commit to yourself and you follow through. That's a great feeling. And conversely, think about how bad it feels when you make a commitment to yourself and you break that commitment to yourself. Right? So it's not just committing to the habit. It's making a commitment to yourself.
Right.
Why so much talk about, goal setting and motivation? Look, because at the end of the day, I'm still a huge believer that your success in the gym, it's more mental than it is physical. And, that's why we talk about here with habits. For me, the big thing is, first, you have to become more self-aware. You have to look at why you're doing the things that you're doing. Why do you have the bad habits that you have? Like when you find yourself at the same point over and over and saying, oh, this is like Groundhog Day. Why is it that I just keep landing in the same spot over and over? Well, you have to look at it and say, what are the things leading up to that? What are the decisions I'm making? What are the habits I'm doing? Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And pretty soon you can start to recognize your own patterns. When you can recognize your own patterns, that's when you can create change.